Imagine being told in Moscow's media that your country is winning, but hearing from prominent insiders that the war is actually lost. That is a signal that something has profoundly shifted. Today, we examine mounting evidence from Russian commentators, military data, and independent monitors that suggests the Kremlin's war in Ukraine is increasingly unsustainable, and that even inside Russia's own ranks, the message is starting to change. Russia's war in Ukraine entered its fourth year with expectations from the Kremlin of a quick victory, one that would crush resistance, seize territory, and force Kiev to accept terms on Moscow's terms. But a growing number of pro-Kremlin voices are now saying the opposite. While many details remain unconfirmed, the picture forming from interviews, state media, and battlefield assessments points toward Russia having suffered massive losses for minimal gains. Among those challenging the official narrative are Russian propagandists and insiders, people who have long supported Kremlin policy but who are now warning of gloom ahead. One such voice is Tatyana Montyan, known in Russian media as someone who normally echoes Kremlin messaging. In a September interview, she claimed that Russian military reserves may have been exhausted. She warned that unless the current spring-to-autumn campaign yields a major breakthrough, which she deemed unlikely, Russia would soon face a second wave of mobilization. She claims that the human cost is increasing and that operational impetus has stagnated. In pro-Kremlin circles, Dmitry Rogozin, the senator for Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia, is another influential person. In a recent interview, Rogozin cited substantial Russian deaths, growing pressure on manpower and supplies, and support from a host of high-tech countries for Ukraine. He asserted that many Russian troops are losing their lives for negligible territorial gains, and that Ukraine's drone fleet is superior to Russia's. Similar to Montyan, Rogozin is a system participant rather than an outside critic, which supports the idea that dissatisfaction is rising within Russia. Pavel Gubarev, a former Donetsk proxy leader, is a third. On Telegram, he bluntly described the situation as a defeat, not just a stalemate. He said Russian propaganda has misled citizens about battlefield success, pointing to damage to Russian oil refineries, which he claimed to be around 26% of refining capacity, and to the heavy losses borne by Russian troops as proof that the war is draining Russia both materially and politically. It is unclear how broadly Gubarev's ideas are held within the Kremlin or among the Russian public at large, but some of his remarks almost seem to call for systemic political reform, because they originate from those who have up until now played a significant role in the narrative infrastructure that supports Moscow's war. These internal criticisms are unique. Their disapproval implies that, even among its typical champions, the price of upholding the story of victory is rising too high. Beyond the commentary, military statistics and geographical assessments offer a dismal contrast to claims of progress made by the Kremlin. Numerous credible open-source organizations, including the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, Verifiable Battlefield Monitoring, and Western Military Intelligence, claim that Russia's gains are negligible in comparison to its losses, particularly since 2024. In 2024 alone, Russia is estimated to have gained about 4,168 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, much of it fields and small settlements, while suffering over 420,000 casualties, killed or wounded. By early 2025, that dynamic appears to have worsened. In March 2025, for example, Russia reportedly captured around 130 square kilometers of Ukrainian land while sustaining nearly 40,000 personnel losses. Some estimates put the ratio at 304 Russian losses per square kilometer captured that month. Additionally, territorial advancements have significantly stalled. The main strategic objectives of Russia's spring and summer offensives, such as creating buffer zones or capturing major population centers, have not been met in a number of areas, including Donetsk, Sumy, and Kharkiv. According to Ukrainian commanders, Russian attempts to seize areas like Pokrovsk or advance into Donetsk have mostly been thwarted. To put it succinctly, the pattern is obvious. Significant human costs, material strain, meager incremental gains, and mounting evidence that even Russian leadership and its media supporters can no longer credibly claim that everything is proceeding as planned. Russia will have to make a number of tough decisions if these trends continue. One is an additional mobilization round. Russian analysts caution that reserves might already be expended or depleted. Mobilization has previously sparked domestic unrest, protests, and low morale among draftees, with reports of poor training, absentee leadership, and unmet promises of compensation. 2. The economic pressure from sanctions, combined with war costs, fuel, losses of equipment, and destruction of production capacity, is adding up. Russia's ability to field and sustain large, modern armed forces appears increasingly stretched. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin has persisted in publicly asserting that Russia is succeeding in its objectives and has referred to the fight as a righteous battle. However, this message stands in stark contrast to what military data and various pro-government voices are saying behind the scenes. Over time, the disparity between private or semi-private evaluation and public speech may lead to a rise in domestic discontent. Although Ukraine has increased counterattacks, used drones and strike capabilities, and successfully defended key locations, military leadership on Ukraine's side says that the Russian offensives in the spring and summer of 2025 have mainly fallen short of their strategic objectives. The front remains long and exposed, over 1,200 to 1,250 kilometers in many estimates, meaning a thinly held defensive line, but one that has largely held together. So, has Russia already lost the war in Ukraine? The answer depends on how one defines lost. If winning means decisive territorial control, crushing Ukrainian resistance, or forcing Kyiv to surrender, or achieving objectives quickly, then yes, by many measures, Russia is failing to achieve those goals. The war has cost far more than what has been gained, even in years of fighting. Pro-Kremlin dissent, independent monitoring, and Ukrainian military assessments all suggest that what was meant to be swift and overwhelming has become grinding, costly attrition with diminishing returns. If loss is defined not in collapse but in the gradual erosion of capability, legitimacy, and will, then that also appears to be happening. Uncertainties remain. Exact numbers of losses are often contested, some claims are unconfirmed, and the internal politics in Russia, like whether dissent can translate into broader opposition, are still unfolding. But the trajectory is clear, and the signs all point in the same direction. Russia is in a far weaker position now than it was at the outset, and its war ambitions face growing obstacles it may not be able to overcome.